After you find success, it is only natural to want to recreate the sensation that proved to be so popular the first time around. But for the developers at Nintendo, that wasn't what they had in mind when they began work on the sequel to their legacy-defining adventure title. While Zelda 1 was a game that focused more on how the player could mold the adventure to their choosing, using their wits and courage to explore and survive, The Adventure of Link is a game that takes an entirely different approach in almost every facet of its design, and in doing so, has proven itself to be one of the most divisive games on the series. The most common way to refer to Zelda 2, even all of these years later, is as a black sheep. It's not an uncommon way to refer to the game, even among fans and critics. So, while I can't disagree with the assertion, I instead want to offer a different perspective. What happens when a series that prides itself on player freedom and choice becomes a linear, railroaded experience? Ladies and gentlemen, this is The Adventure of Link. The Legend of Zelda sold 1 million copies on its first day of release in Japan, all but ensuring a sequel. Unfortunately, Nintendo did not have the luxury of using the same team again, or any of the same staff minus Shigeru Miyamoto and Takashi Tezuka, who acted as a producer and scriptwriter respectively, while they were busy directing arguably the best NES game of all time, Super Mario Bros. 3. Perhaps one of the more baffling decisions made in production, then, is when Miyamoto himself decided that he wanted to make the game a side-scrolling action platformer. Instead of letting directors Tadashi Sugiyama and Yasuhisa Yamamura take the reins and design a game that would follow up and expand on the first game, The Adventure of Link deviates entirely from its predecessor in nearly every way outside of very cursory details. This complete divorce from the free-form, choose-your-own-adventure style of gameplay that the first game encouraged, combined with the new emphasis on action, meant that The Adventure of Link would be a polarizing release regardless of quality. Nintendo anticipated this, even planning on releasing the game as a Gaiden or spin-off title, but deciding to instead commit and name it the sequel to the first game. And credit where it's due, naming this game the official sequel to one of your biggest smash hits, despite knowing how different it was, takes a lot of guts. It shows confidence in your product and belief in your creatives that what they made can stand up to the quality and reverence the predecessor received. Do I personally agree with that assertion? No. But before we dive headfirst into why, let's discuss the plot of the game. Two years have passed since the fall of Ganon. Despite the King of Evil's defeat, the Kingdom of Hyrule was still in turmoil, under constant threat of Ganon's leftover forces. Link, now a young man of 16, was doing what he could to assist in restoring peace throughout the land, but the monsters were seemingly never-ending, and growing increasingly ferocious. Their goal was not the subjugation of Hyrule, but the blood of the young hero to use in a ritual to revive their Dark Master. One day, a strange mark appeared on the back of Link's hand, shaped exactly like the crest of Hyrule. Concerned, Link went to Impa, who immediately recognized what the mark meant. She took the young man to North Castle, and used his mark to open a magically sealed door. Behind the door laid a beautiful woman, laid peacefully asleep on top of a marble table. Impa turned to Link and explained, "Here lies Princess Zelda. The time has come when I must tell you the legend of Zelda handed down in Hyrule." Long ago, Hyrule was in its golden age, ruled by a king that wielded the power of the United Triforce. In his old age, his son, the prince, was supposed to inherit the throne as well as the Triforce. But the king sensed weakness of character in his son. Fearing what would befall Hyrule if the prince was given unlimited power, he split the Triforce of Courage off from its siblings and hid it away, only telling his daughter Princess Zelda of what he had done. After the king's death, the prince ascended the throne. Instantly recognizing the incomplete Triforce, he succumbed to obsession over finding the lost piece. A magician in the kingdom who was close to the former king took advantage of the prince's weakness, and convinced the prince to turn on his sister for the information regarding the Triforce of Courage. Initially, the prince was furious that his sister and father would hide the Triforce from him willingly, though despite his anger, Zelda refused to say a word of its whereabouts to her brother. It was then the magician stood forward, and threatened to put the princess into an eternal slumber if she would not relinquish the information. The prince was sobered immediately. He may have been angry at his family for their seeming betrayal, but to end his sister's life? He tried to fight the magician off, but it was unsuccessful. With his final breath, the magician placed Zelda into a magically induced coma for all of eternity. Distraught with grief, the prince took his sister's body and placed it in his room at the castle. He then ordered that all female children of the royal family be named Zelda in honor of his now slumbering sister, lest this senseless tragedy be forgotten. With the tale finished, Impa handed Link 6 crystals and a scroll with the same crest on his hand. For generations, my family has been handed down these things which have been set aside for a time when a great king will come. They are written in ancient script that no one can read now. But you, who have the crest, may be able to read it. It is said that the key to uniting the Triforce is hidden there. Now is the time for you to read it. Despite having never seen the script before, the mark on his hand glowed, and mind understood the letters on the page. It was the king's handwriting, written from an age long past. To the wielder of the future Triforce. In this scroll lies the secret to a united Triforce. There are 3 pieces of the Triforce: power, wisdom, and courage. I have hidden the Triforce of Courage outside of the kingdom, lest it fall into the wrong hands. The united Triforce is unfathomably powerful, and requires a strength of character few have. If you are reading this, then you have the strength of character required to wield the combined Triforce. In the Valley of Death, the Great Palace hides the Triforce of Courage. Defeat the 6 guardians across Hyrule, and clear the magical seal from the Great Palace, and the completed Triforce will be yours after a final test of courage. There is nothing to fear. You are the one to get the Triforce. You are the beacon of hope for Hyrule. I genuinely love this setup. As a sequel, the motivation of preventing Ganon's resurrection is simple yet effective. As a fan of the original, the expansion of the lore from the incomplete Triforce, the explanation as to why Hyrule was and still is in such chaos, and even the first hint of the reincarnation cycle in the series is incredible to see. There's a lot of language and storytelling that will become familiar to Zelda fans over the course of the series in this game, and it's awesome knowing that despite its less than elated reception that the game gets, it still had an impact on the series and helped it grow into what it is today. Zelda 2's title screen instantly lets players know that they aren't going to be in for quite the same experience as the last game. Both visually, with the sword sticking out of the cliffside, and through its audio, with the game's music being composed by Akito Nakatsuka. I do want to compliment the man's work in this game before I get too into the weeds of negativity. I genuinely like its compositions here. From the excellent title screen music to the iconic dungeon music and catchy bassline in the combat scenes, he even uses the iconic Zelda leitmotif in the overworld theme to drum up the adventurous spirit the first game did. While I struggle to say it's better than the first game's soundtrack overall, I love the work he did on this game, and am glad that these tracks have been remixed and referenced throughout the years. Instead of starting in the middle of the wilderness like last time, Link is standing in front of the slumbering Princess Zelda, sword in hand and ready to go. This is a genius opening screen. It instantly communicates your goal without a moment's hesitation. Zelda is in trouble, and you need to save her. A moment that's made even better from a game design perspective because Zelda's resting place is a completely safe zone, where the player can experiment and learn the ins and outs of how Link controls in a safe environment. Once you leave the castle, though, things become a bit strange. The overworld is top-down, and enemies do roam around, but you can't directly attack them. Instead, when you collide with one, the game loads in a dedicated combat encounter, and you can either defeat the group of enemies on screen for experience or run away. Sound familiar? Yeah, the game's overworld is designed like a traditional turn-based RPG, similar to Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy. But once you get into a combat encounter, the philosophy switches up to that of an action RPG, with your combat prowess, reflexes, and a little luck being required to win the day. To give credit where it's due, the idea behind this combat system is pretty cool. Miyamoto wanted to make sword fighting more than a matter of positioning and timing, but also precision and accuracy. In the first game, Link's movement wasn't very conducive to fluid sword fights, and that resulted in combat that was more of an obligation than fun. Personally, I only found it annoying when fighting higher mobility targets or enemies with invulnerable parts, as it made the already tricky task of connecting a hit that much more difficult. Thankfully, Link is a much more mobile man in this game. His jump is perfectly controllable, and he doesn't come to a halt when swinging his sword. While I wouldn't classify him remotely near the greatest echelons of 2D platforming titans, his control is more than competent when it comes to movement, and if the game's enemy design was better thought out... Well, I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. Let's stay focused on our hero for now. The first flaw of the combat rears its head pretty quickly. It's Link's sword, specifically its range. In the artwork for the game, it appears appropriately sized, giving Link more than proper reach to attack with. In-game, he might as well be using a broom handle. The extension of his sword is abysmal, and while the sword beam does make its return from the first game, it's a total joke here. Outside of trash mobs, it does jack squat for damage. While being at full health in this game will prove difficult like the first game, part of the appeal of the beam is the reward for avoiding damage, providing a positive feedback loop for understanding the game well enough to master its combat. Zelda 2 fumbles the idea by making the beam weak and worthless, providing little incentive to master the mechanics outside of bragging rights. Now, when it comes to the introductory stages of the game, after figuring out how Link controls and understanding the basics of exploration and combat, Zelda 2 does manage to have a good solid balance of player-driven exploration that they can choose how to interact with. It's not quite as open as the first game, but I genuinely believe that Zelda 2 as a game starts at its strongest point. There are treasures to find, caves to explore, and towns to... Wait a second. Towns? With people? Holy cow, this is awesome! The very people we are trying to save in the first game, and we can interact with them. As I've grown older, I've come to really appreciate the art of good NPCs in video games, and the Zelda series is a major reason for that. Later games in the series will provide masterclass examples on how to create engaging societies for your characters to interact with, and it's here in Zelda 2 where we see the denizens of Hyrule for the very first time. While they don't provide the most amazing dialogue or world building, there are townspeople willing to assist Link in his travels. Women capable of healing Link's injuries and restoring his magic, wise old men who teach Link various forms of magic, and even soldiers of Hyrule that teach Link new sword techniques. Link will even directly save some of these people on his travels, from kidnapped children to sickly townspeople. I find a genuine charm to these quests in this game because they show the direction the series would eventually take in very rudimentary stages. Link may be a grand hero chosen by the gods to represent the best of us, but the best of us will always put others before themselves, regardless of their standing in life. One of the new features in this game is the magic meter, something that will eventually become a series staple. With this meter, Link can use a variety of spells for both combat and traversal purposes that he will find in the various towns in the game. In the town of Hyrule, we learn our first spell, the shield spell. It doubles your defense, and while this may seem like a bit overkill for so early on, it unfortunately isn't. You will be using this spell for a majority of the game, regardless of scenario, so it's best that you get it now before you start pulling hair out. From here, there are a couple of options you could take. You could head directly to the first palace and challenge it, or explore out of the way for items and treasure. While you can't get as over-prepared as the first Zelda, I would recommend doing this for a couple of reasons. Learning the controls, as they are the most unique in the series' history, and this will help you acclimate to them. Buffing your stats, which is almost a requirement for the later stages of this game, and doing so now will save you grief later. And finally, it will help you understand the general design behind many of the areas in this game, from the enemies and platforming. Once you feel comfortable, it's time to head into the first palace of the game, Parapa Palace. The palaces of Zelda 2 are extremely similar to the dungeons in the first Zelda. underground labyrinths meant to challenge the player in a variety of ways. Unfortunately, as this is an NES game and platformer, the level of complexity in both combat and puzzle design is fairly lacking. Here's where I'm going to start getting a bit harsher towards the game, because it's at this point where the game's primary gameplay becomes the 2D combat. As mentioned before, Link's sword is absolutely pitiful in this game. The reach is so poor that you need to be extremely close to enemies to hit them. Fortunately, his shield is significantly more durable this time around, capable of blocking a large number of attacks as long as it's placed properly on Link's high or low plane. If you're standing, the shield is blocking high. If you're crouching, he's blocking low. Simple and effective. If the enemy design in this game wasn't absolutely awful. I will make no reservations in saying that Zelda 2's enemies are some of the worst to fight in the series' history, for any variety of reasons, from nonsensical attack patterns, large health pools, knockback, difficult placement, and a general lack of respect for the player. This game features a cavalcade of monsters that simply do not care about making things fun. It starts as soon as the first enemies you find in the palace, tin suits. On contact with Link, they steal experience from you. Okay, well, killing them should give me some back, right? Nope. They give you absolutely nothing on death. Then what's the point of them stealing experience? In most games with thief enemies, killing them before they escape results in you at least getting your stuff back. I could understand that not being possible on NES hardware, but at least give me some experience for it. Otherwise, you're just punishing new players unjustly for making simple mistakes. Then there's the bubbles, enemies that bounce around the room and drain magic on contact with Link. While annoying, these guys are more easily avoided and telegraphed when they appear. They even give a whopping 50 experience points when you kill them, which is a massive amount for this point in the game. So why am I bringing them up? Their health. If you enter this dungeon at level 1, these enemies take 126 individual hits to kill. That is inexcusable. They aren't difficult to hit, they aren't difficult to dodge. They're simply early enemies that are meant for players to learn the movement and controls of Link. So why on earth are you punishing players who want to attempt killing an enemy with over a minute of standing and mashing the A button? This isn't a challenge, it's tedium. And finally, there's one of the more infamous regular enemies in the game, the Iron Knuckle. There aren't many at this point in the game, but it will become a staple enemy, so it's best you learn how to deal with them now. The way the game wants you to deal with them is by fighting them on even ground, trading sword strikes until you find an opening to deal damage to them. Here's the problem. Their attacks are not telegraphed. They block your own attacks selectively, so sometimes you can hit them by mashing, but other times they'll see everything you throw at them. It becomes a war of attrition, one that you're more likely to lose the further into the game you get. That is, unless you learn just how powerful the Y-axis is in this game. That's right, the high ground has decided to offer its blessing to us today in the form of a jumping strike. If you leap in and time a sword strike as you're landing, Link will deal damage as he falls every single time. Is it cheesy? Yes. Do I remotely care? No. So I will make liberal use of this strategy for the rest of the entire game, and you should too if you ever decide to play it. Trust me, your blood pressure will thank you. The first boss of this game is called Horsehead, and just like Aquamentus before him, he's not a very challenging boss. To his credit though, he's managed to stay alive longer than my basic introduction to him, so that's a plus. Since he wears body armor, his one weak spot is his head, so if you learned how to fight Iron Knuckles effectively, then this won't prove an issue for you. With his defeat, the first of the 6 palaces has fallen. From here, you get one of the more humorous spells in the series' history, the jump spell. It doubles your jump height, and while Link has never been incapable of jumping, this is definitely the most his lateral movement has been tested before the open world era of the series. From here begins an extremely long journey to the second palace, and where the game's quality takes a massive nosedive. If you're playing this game for the first time and don't know what you're doing, it's more than likely that you'll end up running into the largest difficulty spike in the series' history at this point. Death Mountain. Unlike the first game, where this was Ganon's final lair and by far the hardest part of the game, here it's a giant maze of enemies that serve as an intensely difficult gauntlet and roadblock. This is where players are more than likely to discover just how poorly this game's overworld is thought out. For the first and only time in the series' history, you have a life counter. When you die, you spawn on the screen you died on with full magic and health. That's fine and dandy, but when you get a game over, which will happen a significant amount of time in this game, you get sent back to the North Palace. The game over screen has Ganon's silhouette laughing at you, which legitimately unnerved me as a child, but now only serves to piss me off. Every single time you get a game over, you have to go back through the overworld to where you died. There's no fast travel, no way to skip the forced encounters on the way, and if you get into a random encounter and take damage, you either have to take a detour to heal, or hope you can get farther along than you did the last time to find a new healing spot. It is monotonous and just plain not fun. Death Mountain is especially bad because of just how large it is, how difficult it is to reach it, get through it, find the hammer, and escape it without losing your 3 lives. There are occasional 1-ups hidden in the overworld, but these don't act as permanent life extenders, only a single 1-up that despawns once you pick it up. God forbid you find one and instantly die, because that's all you get out of it. And please, do not miss the hammer when you go through here. While you don't need it to get to Palace 2, if you die at any point after Death Mountain and you don't have the hammer, you have to go all the way back through this godforsaken place again just to grab it. Make life easier for yourself and grab it now to avoid the stress later. Once you finally get through Death Mountain, the oceanfront town of Mido will have one of the most important techniques in the game for us. Hop into this church to find a Hyrulean knight, and he will teach you the downward thrust. This move is not required by any means, but my god does it make the combat feel significantly better. It feels like Scrooge McDuck or Shovel Knight, where you can bounce off enemies or damage them when you land the move, meaning you no longer need to stand and wait for openings if the pathway ahead doesn't have a low ceiling. The town also has the fairy spell, which turns you into a fairy. You can use it to fly over gaps and up ledges the jump spell couldn't reach. There's no combat capability, but hey, it's unique at least. You might be wondering about the puzzle and dungeon design in this game, since I hadn't mentioned them yet. In Zelda 1, while not particularly brain-taxing, the dungeons did require some thought process in both how you used your items and how you would proceed through them. They are competent mazes with some archaic design choices, but it's part of the era and not something I would classify as bad. Meanwhile, the puzzles in these palaces, more often than not, amount to simply wandering down hallways until you find keys, and then backtracking to where locked doors are to progress. If there's anything more complex, it's typically not well designed or communicated to the player, which I will be pointing out as I reach them. Midoro Palace is a dungeon I don't think has particularly great design. If you don't know about the 2 keys at the start of the dungeon, once you get to the halfway point with the power glove, you'll have to walk all the way back to the start and find the key you missed. It's not challenging, it's just frustrating. The boss of the palace, the Helmet Head, is pretty similar to the Horse Head, except when you hit his head, his helmet will fly off and start shooting at Link. It's different, but nothing you can't deal with. From here, you'll head south through a large graveyard that even includes the old King of Hyrule's grave, and to the 3rd palace, the Island Palace. It's nothing special, in fact it's more linear than the last palace, so you'll primarily be fighting in this one. And boy oh boy does the combat really start to get worse at this point. Link's pitiful sword range and useless sword beam get even more apparent as you start fighting blue iron knuckles. These guys can not only fire sword beams at you that will always damage you regardless of your defense, but they can fire them no matter their health, unlike you. And the designers felt it necessary to put one in a small enough hallway that you can't use the jump in and poke them strategy I highlighted earlier. We aren't even halfway through this game and I'm just so annoyed. None of the decision-making lends itself to fun or engaging gameplay, only tedium. Why do enemies have incredibly large health pools? Why does Link's sword get outreached by every other enemy's sword? Why can I not refill my health or magic without lucky item drops? There's so many instances of the first game showing more respect for the player by having healing items available to purchase in the overworld, ranged items that allow for you to take advantage of positioning better, and even the worst enemies like Dark Nuts or Wizros could be taken out with alternative alternative means if you got skilled enough. In this game, it forces the player to engage on its level without flexibility, and the big problem is that said level is just poorly thought out and unfun. The boss of this palace is Rebanak. Despite the unique name, it's a blue iron knuckle on a horse. The first half of the fight is made a complete joke by the downward thrust, and the second half is made simple by the jumping thrust. Just don't get hit by all the sword beams he fires and you'll be fine. From here, there's a bit of a way to go until you get to the next palace. In the town of Nibiru, you can get the fire spell, which allows you to shoot fire out of your sword. It's a neat idea, but since magic is so limited in this game and not easily refilled, I don't use this unless absolutely necessary. Next, you'll head north and find a giant maze island. This is the home of the next palace, but do not enter it yet. If you do this, you will be unable to defeat the next boss. Before you get there, you need to find the kidnapped child and deliver him to his mother in the town of Darunia. Do this, and the wise man she leads you to will teach you the Reflect spell, which makes your shield capable of bouncing magic back where it came from. There's also your second and final sword technique, the Upward Thrust, which isn't nearly as useful as the downward one, but it at least gives you more options to attack aerial enemies. The Maze Palace itself isn't anything special. It's nothing awful, but it doesn't do anything to stand out either. It reintroduces us to Wizrows, but unlike the first game, they're total jokes. Equip Reflect, Stand Still, and BAM! Dead. The other enemies are just harder recolors of what we fought before, and that's always a good sign when we're running into that barely halfway through the game, right? Don't bother switching things up and forcing players to create new strategies, just give them higher numbers to deal with, and that's enough. The boss, Karak, is a complete joke. It's a bigger, angrier Wizrow. Unfortunately for him, he'll need to take up his anger with the enemy designers because he's defeated in the exact same way as every other Wizrow in the dungeon. But there is one teeny, tiny issue with this fight. If you don't have Reflect, you can't win. That means you have to die or game over to backtrack and get the spell, then come all the way back through Maze Island and the palace to reach the boss. If you do have the Reflect spell, you can just stand still and watch the boss kill itself. This is awful design, and the fact players can get here without the required item to beat him is either intentionally cruel or a terrible oversight. The next palace is another short bounce away, this time over the ocean. Once inside, the Ocean Palace doesn't prove itself to be very unique outside of one extremely cryptic instance. After you've made it a fair bit through the dungeon, you'll find what you think is a dead end. But instead, it's just an illusion. If you jump into the wall, Link just walks right through it. Now, in fairness, there is an NPC that vaguely tells you that the palace has a, quote, false wall, but how is a player supposed to find this specific wall? There's nothing to denote which walls are real and fake, and up until this point in the game, illusions haven't been a thing. It's not the worst thing this game does, but it definitely made me thankful to have a guide on hand to avoid more frustration. Speaking of frustration, the boss fight here is a great example of it. Guma is a reversal of the first three bosses, where instead of his head being his weakness, it's his stomach. This on its own is a neat idea, but at the risk of sounding like a broken record, Link's reach is absolutely awful. This boss fight consists of you having to time running in, hitting him, and leaping out of the way of his mace. If you do any of these things wrong, the window of opportunity to escape damage is extremely small, so you'll either get hit or whiff on your swing, and it just makes things more tedious. Use the shield and jump spell here to lessen your headache. Afterwards, we have the trek to the final palace, and boy is this probably the worst instance of a game being way too much like its older brother. While traveling in southeast Hyrule, you'll come across the abandoned town of Kasuto. Why is it abandoned? Can't imagine the life insurance rates were very good. Now, the problem with this part of the game is twofold. Firstly, there's nothing indicating that the residents of Kasuto fled, only that the village is empty. Hell, there's a graveyard just north of this place. It wouldn't be a stretch to think their dead are buried there. But that's not entirely the case. The surviving residents built a hidden village, one far away from Old Kasuto, and hidden deep in the forests of Hyrule. Okay, you think to yourself, then this must be like the other hidden areas of the overworld where if I step on the right tile, I'll find it. Nope! You buffoon, you're supposed to cut down the forests. With a hammer. Tile by tile, until you find it. The game does nothing to indicate that you have this ability at any point, and never makes use of it again after this point. It is a baffling decision, and one that seems completely at odds with how the rest of the game handled its overworld secrets. I can't wrap my head around why they did it like this. But we're here, the final major town in the game, and the one with the most to offer us. A new spell, the spell, the fourth and final magic container, and the major reason you got the spell. Use it at the end of New Kasuto, all the way on the outskirts, and you can find a hidden cavern that has the magical key, a fantastic item that unlocks any door we come across. Why this wasn't made available earlier is yet another confusing conundrum, but we're getting so close to the end of the game that I don't want to think about it anymore. The final palace, fittingly named the Hidden Palace for all the secrets we had to reveal to find this place, is probably the best palace in the game, if you have the magical key. The dead ends aren't quite as long, the challenges here aren't entirely combat-focused, with a fair bit of simple but fair platforming challenges implemented, and while I think the boss entrance is a little too cheap since it requires magic to access, I had to take a life and refill my magic meter to access it, the boss itself is fairly simple. Barba is a long-necked dragon with a simple pattern of attack. It rises up from the lava pits around you and breathes a stream of flame at you. While dodging this is nearly impossible, if you use the shield spell and have enough health, you can just trade hits until you win. There is knockback, so don't be too reckless with your movement, but overall, this fight is nothing aggravating. With that, we have finally placed all 6 crystals in their respective statues. On to the endgame. Before you do anything, go to Old Kasuto. Now that you have the cross from the Hidden Palace, you can properly navigate the town and find the Wise Man here. He will teach you the strongest magic in the game, the Thunder Spell. You need this spell. If you get all the way through the next section without it, you cannot win the fight. That's already bad enough considering they did the exact same thing earlier with the Maze Palace, but unlike the Maze Palace, where it's a relatively quick trek back to it from the start, buckle up and clench your teeth, kids. Welcome to the Valley of Death. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. This area is atrocious, filled with enemies that spawn in inconsistent or plain awful locations to effectively deal with, needing to platform around said enemies with old school knockback, and yes, if you get a game over, you have to walk all the way back here, complete with all the forced encounters on the way to drain your health and your patience. In most other games, this would have the dubious honor of being the worst area in the game, but because there's just so many awful stretches of unfair design in this game, it has some pretty tight competition. Thankfully, once you make it through that absolute mess, you've arrived at the final palace in the game, the Great Palace, complete with an original theme, just like Death Mountain in the last game. And just like Death Mountain, this place will test you in some extreme ways. Unfortunately, this place isn't quite as well designed. It's gargantuan and filled with several dead ends. If you make the mistake of heading down some of these, you are forced to travel all the way back the way you came just to get back on track. This palace is brutally long and confusing for first-time players, and especially those without a guide on hand. I'll never forget my first time playing this on the Wii Virtual Console as a kid, because I ended up taking an entire Saturday just beating this one palace, dying over and over, getting lost and having to actively memorize which pathways I had been through. Now you might be wondering why I'm not losing my mind over having to get all the way back here after a game over, and that's because you actually spawn right in front of the Great Palace when you do. Thankfully, I didn't do that on this run though, and I saved some of the extra lives for specifically this purpose. But it is a welcome safety net I wish the rest of the game had. I will give them that much credit. Once you get through the palace's many combat encounters, invisible walls, and dead ends, you arrive at the final boss, the Thunderbird. As his name implies, you need to use the Thunder spell on him to make him vulnerable, so make sure your magic is full before you come in here. Once you do that, the fight itself isn't too difficult. I found equipping the shield and jump spells gives you enough defense to make winning a matter of maneuvering around his attacks and waiting for an opening. If you don't equip jump, your openings get a whole lot tighter. With a final slash to the face, the Thunderbird goes down. Walking into the final room, a single man stands guarding the Triforce of Courage. He disappears as the room's lights dim. Surrounded by shadow, Link is faced with his greatest challenge yet. Himself. That's right, the first appearance of Dark Link in the entire series, and at an admittedly cool story moment. A final test of skill and courage for the Triforce of Courage. Now, while I adore this fight from a thematic standpoint, the actual gameplay of it is bad. There's no way around it. The AI is either impossibly tricky to deal with, blocking and dodging anything you can do with ease and striking back with double the efficiency, or brain dead to the point where you can stand in the corner spamming attacks and it will walk into them until they die. It sucks that this boss fight is so lame because Dark Link as a whole is an incredibly iconic part of the Zelda series, but for his first appearance, this leaves a lot to be desired. Once Link downs his dark doppelganger, the sage finally bestows the Triforce of Courage to Link. With this, he goes back to the North Palace and makes a wish on the completed Triforce to wake up the princess. With a flutter of her eyes, she stands and thanks Link for saving Hyrule and calls him a real hero. As the curtains fall, she steps closer to the young man, and the game ends. God. Even all these years later, this is such a difficult game to talk about in the broad scope of the Zelda series. So much of what it does is either hardly brought back, or it starts some of the most iconic series trends we still see today. Remember the town names? Rauru, Rudo, Mido, Darunia, and Naburu? If you're a Zelda fan, you know those names quite well. Not only are they the names of important Ocarina of Time characters, but Darunia is responsible for the Goron naming convention that the series still uses to this very day. Dark Link becomes a series staple and fan-favorite enemy, the temple stage in Smash Bros. Is based on this game, and the music as a whole is legitimately great stuff that even some non-Zelda fans might know. But for every positive I can give this game, there's about 10 negatives I can think of, large and small. But the big bad word I kept harping back to as I was playing and writing the script was tedious. When you first boot up the game and start with the adventure, it's fun wandering around and killing enemies. But then the game starts to give you friction in ways that the first game never did. It slows you down, pushes you around, rattles you, shakes you, twists you, bops you, and makes sure that your time spent playing is not a smooth one. From the health sponge enemies, random attack patterns of enemies, cryptic secrets, extreme linearity, lack of weapon variety, poorly thought out progression gates, and less than forgiving life system, it's just a recipe of bad ideas that no amount of good intentions could save. Saying all that, Zelda 2 may be one of, if not my least favorite games in the entire series. But I don't hate it. I can't bring myself to do that. I just don't like it. I won't recommend it to anyone unless they're extremely curious, and if you must play it through legal means, make sure it's through the Switch Online service so you can use their save states. It makes handling the difficulty significantly easier and can cut down on the backtracking substantially. For a game that's so infamous even all of these years later, Zelda 2 certainly lives up to its Black Sheep moniker. It's a game that set out to expand the combat and make it its central focus in gameplay, but through a whole host of factors, resulted in what I can only describe as a disjointed and misguided attempt. It's not even close to the worst NES game ever made, and I want everyone who's watched this far to understand I'm not disparaging the game just because it's not the first Zelda, but even comparing it to its contemporaries on the NES, Zelda 2 falls well short of what I believe all video games should be, and that's fun. Thank you all so much for watching. My name is Seth. I appreciate each and every single one of you, and take care.